welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and welcome to day 2 of the 12 days of Christmas. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my 40 before 40 list. So these are 40 books that I want to read before I turn 40. It's really funny because I've been seeing a lot of people have been doing these sort of videos lately, like a 30 by 30, 40 by 40, 50 by 50. I've been seeing a ton of these lately, and I have been working on this list for months and months and months and months. And it's really funny to see all these people now have all these videos, and I'm like, oh fun, I get to add mine really soon. But I had been planning to do it for the 12 days of Christmas for like probably at least 6 months. So I'm really excited to finally share this list with you. This list has been gone over painstakingly, and there were so many books that I wanted to put on here and I couldn't. But I mean, I could have done more books maybe, I don't know, but I am currently 36. So I have 4 years before I turn 40. So I just need to read 10 of these books each year in order to meet my goal. So I have them split up into genres. They're mostly classics, honestly. I know you're really surprised by that. I do have a nonfiction section as well, but I have them split into various sections. So like I have a British literature section, but I also have a Victorian section because that's specifically a category that I really love. I also have an American section, which is kind of disproportionately larger than some of the others, but I was realizing that there's a lot of classic American books I've not read that I really want to read soon. I have a Russian literature section and then one that's just translated literature. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with Victorian literature. So I love Dickens and I really want to read every major work that he has written, and so far I have read most of them. I only have 3 left to read. So those 3 made it onto this list. I tried for the most part to not have just like repeats of a whole bunch of authors, but like I am so close to finishing all of Dickens' works. So the 3 that I still have left to finish are Dombey and Son, which I don't really know much about, but I've heard a lot of people really love. Barnaby Rudge, which I've heard very mixed things about actually. Heard a lot of people don't like this one, and I think this is centered around a rebellion, but I don't really know the details of it. And lastly, Hard Times, which is actually a really small Dickens novel, honestly. And I don't know anything about this one at all, and I don't know if I've ever heard anyone really talk about it. I think it's probably a more obscure Dickens, I'm guessing. I only have a couple of other Victorian classics on here, which is surprising probably because of how much I love Victorian classics. But I mean, there's a lot of Victorian books I would love to read, but there's only some that I feel like really driven, like, oh my gosh, I really want to read this way sooner than others. One of those is Adam Bede by George Eliot, and I could have put all of George Eliot's books on here, but I didn't want to do that and just be like, I want to read every book by this author with a whole bunch of authors, because I feel like that ends up not being a very diverse list. And I really want diversity in my classics reading as well. I don't want it to all just be the same author over the next 4 years. So I tried to prioritize which George Eliot am I the most excited about reading. I think I've read 3 or 4 of her books so far. So Adam Bede is the one that got chosen. It's the one I've heard the most good things about that I still have left on my list, but I had a hard time choosing between this one and The Mill on the Floss. I'll probably also still read The Mill on the Floss over the next 4 years, but this is the one that's official. I've also really wanted to read Wives and Daughters for a really long time. This is often considered one of Gaskell's best works, even though it was not completed before she died, and I really want to read it. And I've kind of like, I've not really like truly loved anything I've read by Gaskell. I've enjoyed them, but I haven't like loved any of them. And so I feel like if there's one that I'm really gonna love, it's probably gonna be Wives and Daughters. Okay, I have some other British books on here that are not from the Victorian time period. I really want to read The Silmarillion, and it scares me, which is hilarious because I love Lord of the Rings. I've read it a million times. Literally read the entirety of the Lord of the Rings trilogy 13 times in my life. And I've read The Hobbit probably like 4 or 5 times. So I love J.R.R. Tolkien. I am not really scared of like his writing style, but like The Silmarillion, I tried to read it when I was in high school multiple times, and I was so bored. And so I'm like, oh no. But I really want to read it because it has so much background on Middle Earth, and I think Tolkien is such a genius, and I think it's going to be worth the read. But I think I just have to get over, first of all, my intimidation, and then also like the hump of actually getting into his extensive world building that I think is a little bit drier in the beginning. I also want to read Ivanhoe. I have not read any Sir Walter Scott at all, and this is the one that I hear about the most, so it's the one that made the list. I really want to read Brave New Worlds, and I really like classic dystopian literature, and this is one that I've never picked up. And really, I don't know, it's not one that I hear about as frequently. I hear about Fahrenheit 451 and 1984 more frequently than this one, but this is one I really want to read. My last British literature is A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. The only one of his I've read so far is A Room with a View, and I liked it. And I have heard quite a few people say that A Passage to India is his best work. So we'll see. Moving on to American literature. Again, I said this is like my largest portion because I realize there's a lot of gaps in my classic American literature. So speaking of dystopian, I have not yet read Fahrenheit 451. I want to read that so badly, and I love Bradbury so much, and I think I will just be head over heels in love with this book. I definitely want to read more Willa Cather. I have adored every single thing I have read by her. So it was really hard to kind of like make a choice because I could have put a whole bunch of Willa Cather on here. But again, I didn't want this list to be redundant. So I chose one of ours, which is the book of hers that won the Pulitzer, which is why I put it on this list. I already have plans to read several other works of Willa Cather next year in 2025, and neither of them are one of ours. So I will read more Willa Cather besides this, but this is the one that I'm like prioritizing in a 40 before 40 list because it won the Pulitzer. I also really want to read Eight Cousins by Louise May Alcott. She's someone that I definitely want to read more of her works. I've only had one of her books that I've absolutely loved so far, but I've heard some people tell me that Eight Cousins is their favorite, and so I really want to read this one. I also want to read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. In general, I just want to read Virginia Woolf, and I don't think I'm going to like it, and I don't think I'm going to like her books at all. So it's kind of funny that I put this on here. I don't own this book, and I don't intend to. I'm gonna borrow it from the library because I don't think I'm gonna like it because it's very like stream of consciousness, and that's not really my thing. But she's such an iconic American author that I'm like, I need to try one of her books. I'm okay with actually DNFing this one if I don't like it, but I really want to try it. I'm a big Flannery O'Connor fan, but I've only read one of her novels so far. I read Wise Blood, and I really want to read The Violent Buried Away, which is her second novel, and obviously last completed novel before she passed away, and I think I'm gonna love it. One of the scarier books on this list is Moby Dick, which I have actually tried and DNF'd twice, but I really want to finish it. The first time I DNF'd it, it was because I didn't have time, and then the second time was because I was like really overscheduled, and just it was stressful to try to keep up with the reading schedule that I had imposed upon myself. There are people who hate this, but I actually have some really close friends who have very similar tastes in reading to me, and they loved it. So I'm hoping I will too. I only got about a quarter of the way through before I DNF'd it the second time, and I was actually enjoying it. I just didn't have time. I'm gonna get to it. I will conquer this white whale. One of the other authors that I have multiple books on this list is Wendell Berry, because I just discovered him in 2024. Well, I'd heard about him for many years before that, but like really want to read more of him. So I have both Nathan Coulter and Hannah Coulter on this list, and it was hard to decide like which ones, because there are others of his that I've heard good things about as well, but these two I think go together because I think Hannah and Nathan are spouses, and so I think these two like go together. I've heard the most about Hannah Coulter than any of his other books, and so I really want to read these two. Do you ever have a book that's been sitting on your shelf for an absurd amount of time, and yet you've never even tried to read it, but you feel like you should because it's an influential classic? That's Uncle Tom's Cabin for me. I actually have a Barnes & Noble edition that I got when I was in high school, and I've never read it. So I'm gonna get to it. I'm gonna read it. I have a couple of classics on here from Black authors that I am dying to read. One of them is Passing by Nella Larson. This is a teeny tiny book about a person who can pass as white, but they're actually Black, and I've heard such amazing things about this one. I also have Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Never read anything by her, and I really, really want to, and I've heard that she's incredible. Okay, moving on to Russian classics. I have other translated classics on here, but you know how I feel about Russian classics, I'm sure. Okay, first of all, we have What Is to Be Done. I can't remember the author of this one, but it'll be on the screen. So I've read multiple books that are in conversation with this book. I've read Fathers and Sons and Demons, and both of those were talking to each other, and that conversation was initially spurred by this book, and so I really want to read it. I also want to read A Hero of Our Times. I don't know anything about this at all, but I do own it and I've heard really good things. It's actually pretty short, so that is also a bonus. I want to read Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. Heard amazing things about this book. Even though it's like one of his lesser known novels, there's a couple of people who have been like, you have to read Resurrection, it's so good, and they think it's better than Anna Karenina and War and Peace, which is high praise indeed. Can you believe I've never read any Chekhov? Like, he's the last like super famous Russian classic author that I want to read. I know there are other Russian authors that I haven't read, obviously, but I've not read any Chekhov, and he's like one of the big names in Russian literature. So I want to read Ward Number 6 and Other Stories, and this is like a collection of his short stories that I own, so that's why this is the one that made it. I don't even know if this has like the best of his short stories in it or not, but because it's the one that I already own, this is going to be my initial Chekhov. I also want to finish Dostoevsky's major works, and I only have 2 of those left. One of those is Notes from the Underground, which is one of his shorter major works, but it scares me because it's like really crazy, apparently. Like, it just, the whole thing is like a fever dream. And I am not adverse to fever dream-like qualities in books, in Dostoevsky in particular, which is not surprising because, you know, you read, I think all of his books have like a moment that feels very fever dream-esque. There are moments of that in Crime and Punishment. You've got like the really crazy fever dream in Brothers Karamazov. There is a lot of fever dream-like qualities, but I think that's this whole book. And yeah, it intimidates me a bit. One that doesn't intimidate me, that I'm like really excited to read, and I can't believe I haven't read it yet, is Notes from a Dead House. This is a fictional work, but it is based on Dostoevsky's time in exile in Siberia. And so a lot of the characters that are in this book are ones that he actually, like, based on people he actually encountered while he was there. And so, yeah, this one apparently like also helps give some insight into like some of his other works and just how he felt and operated in general after experiencing exile in Siberia. Okay, let's get into the translated works. Another scary book. There's a couple scary books on here. Don Quixote. I actually read like half of this and DNF'd it like 2 years ago. And yeah, it wasn't that I like hated it, it just was starting to feel kind of repetitive. But then after I ended up DNFing this, I read some King Arthur books with my daughter, and I was like, wait a second, this is how he was acting in Don Quixote. Like, okay, like it kind of gave me some context for like why the whole chivalrous thing. And so yeah, so I really want to read this, and I want to say that I've completed it because I feel like it's like very iconic and has influenced just a lot of things in literature and in culture. The same thing is true of the ancient literature that I have on here, which would be the Iliad and the Odyssey. I tried to read the Iliad a couple of years ago. I think it was my first Christmas on BookTube. I was trying to read it like that month, and like my brain was like, absolutely not. Like, it could not focus on it. And I've tried a couple different versions, a couple different translations, and some of them were more poetry and some of them were more prose. I think I would do better with it in a more prose style than a poetry style, but I don't know. I really want to have actually read these though, because again, super influential and long-lasting effects in culture. I really want to read The Hunchback of Notre Dame because I loved Les Miserables and I really enjoyed Victor Hugo's writing for the most part. Are there tangents? Heck yeah, but that's okay. If you know that going in, then you can kind of, you know, deal with it. The only thing I know about The Hunchback of Notre Dame is based on the Disney movie that I saw when I was a kid, and so I'm really interested to see what this is like because I'm sure that it's very different. I want to read The Metamorphosis. I was going to try to read a Kafka earlier in 2024 and it just like the timing just did not work out. So I did not read it at all. But it probably wasn't the best place to start with Kafka. Most people say that The Metamorphosis is the best place to start. This is a weird book. Pretty sure a guy just like turns into a bug and it sounds really weird. And I like weird classics. I also want to read The Stranger, and I don't know anything about this at all, but except that it's also really weird. So I think it's polarizing that people are like, wow, this book's fascinating, or they're like, what the actual heck is this book doing? I don't know which side I'm gonna land on, but I picked it up at a thrift store, so I own it and I really want to give it a try. I want to read some Jules Verne. I don't think I've ever read any Jules Verne. I remember as a kid, I had Around the World in 80 Days, and I like would fall asleep every time I tried to read it. I thought it was really boring, but you know, I would hope that my palate has changed a bit from when I was like 11 years old when I tried to read it. The reason I chose 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is that my husband has actually read this. He went on a road trip with a friend and they listened to it on audio and he's like, it was so good. I loved it. And I'm like, wow, okay. So that makes me feel like it's probably relatively accessible. I don't know why I was like so intimidated of Jules Verne, probably just because I had a poor experience with him when I was like in middle school. Okay, another book that I don't know if I'm gonna like it. I feel like I probably won't like it, but I also like really want to try it. I want to read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I actually have all of her books that I picked up at McKay's for like 50 cents. Like they were so cheap, and maybe that's because no one wants to buy them. I don't know, but Atlas Shrugged is, I think, considered like her masterpiece. And I think it's also like a dystopian. And I already said I really like dystopian literature. So I know it's very like heavy in philosophy and her own like beliefs in politics and philosophy and government and all of that kind of stuff, which might mean that I don't like it, but it might mean that I also really find it fascinating. It could go either way. The last book on here for translated is more of a modern classic, but I guess some of these are, because I guess Bradbury is also a modern classic, but I think this was published in like the 60s maybe, and that's Silence. This is Japanese, about some Jesuit priests who are in Japan during a time where Christians are being persecuted. It might be kind of brutal in places, but I'm just really fascinated by the story. My last little chunk of books here is nonfiction. So the first nonfiction that I want to finish by the time I am 40 is this Dostoevsky biography by Joseph Frank. And I don't need to read like the whole thing. The reason why I say that is because I own the condensed version and it's like 1,000 pages long. He wrote like a multi-volume set on Dostoevsky's life, and I don't need to read that. I'm totally cool reading the condensed one, but I can't start this until I have finished Notes from the Underground and Notes from a Dead House, because he has different chapters that he dedicates to different like works that Dostoevsky has completed, and they are spoilery. And I've heard that they can actually be like really beneficial in helping you to kind of like understand what Dostoevsky was trying to do. So that's really exciting. But I don't want to be spoiled for his major works. To be spoiled for like a short story or novella is one thing, but I don't really want to be spoiled for those. So I'm gonna have to read those first before I pick up this behemoth of a biography. It might take me a whole year to get through because it's so long, but I really want to read it. In a very different vein, I want to read Lark Rise to Candleford. I love that show. We watched it together as a family and just enjoyed it so much. And so I really want to give this a try and read it. I know that Dia and Stephanie read it last year and they loved it, and it's like really cozy and really wonderful, and I really want to read it. I have a couple of classic Christian nonfiction that I want to read. I've never completely read Confessions by St. Augustine. I've read bits and pieces of it, but I've never read the whole thing cover to cover. So I really want to read that, along with The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. And this is one that I see referenced a lot in a lot of Christian literature, whether that be like more modern Christian books can reference him sometimes, but there's also like a lot of like classic Christian authors that reference him too. And so I really, really want to read this one. The last one, I have it in nonfiction, but it's a work of poetry. And I didn't want to just do like just poetry. And I'm talking about Christian nonfiction right now, so this feels like a good place for it. That's Paradise Lost by John Milton. This is a book that really also really intimidates me. I have some books on here that I'm like, yes, I'm so excited, or authors that I already love. And then I have books on here that scare me. And this is one of those ones because first of all, it is like an epic poem about the fall of man. And while I think it will be interesting because of my own faith and stuff, I think I will overall enjoy it and be very glad I read it. I am not a very big poetry person, and so that makes it very intimidating to me. But again, this is one that is referenced all over the place. Like, I really, really want to read it. This is my list of 40 books I would like to read by the time I am 40. I tried to make it a little bit more like well-rounded, but these are books that I genuinely want to read. Even the books that I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna like this. Like, I want the exposure to things that have been like very influential or talked about a lot, like they're classics for a reason. And if I end up hating them, that's okay. If I end up DNFing some of these, that's okay. Although I am not going to allow myself to DNF Moby Dick or Don Quixote because I've tried to DNF both of them and I'm not doing it. Those were soft DNFs. I always knew I was gonna come back to them because I'm like, I have to finish these. There's some like iconic works that I come back to, and they're not the only ones that I have done this with. I DNF'd War and Peace twice before I finished it, and Les Miserables 3 or 4 times because I just kept trying and I just kept not getting anywhere with it. So I'm okay with the fact that I have DNF'd these in the past. Those are the ones I'm not allowed to DNF. Any of the other ones on here, like if I have to DNF them, I can't. But like, I'm not DNFing those, I will conquer them. Anyways, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. I don't know if you've read any of these that you want to weigh in and share your thoughts on them. Tips or tricks if they're scarier ones. If you have a really good translator that you like for the Iliad and the Odyssey, I would love it if you would share that because I was having trouble finding a translator that I enjoyed. And I'd also love to hear from you. Are there classics that you are like, these are classics I want to read before I die? Because this is essentially like, I know this is 40 before 40, but it's also kind of a classics bucket list. There are a lot of authors on here that I've been wanting to try, or authors that I want to complete all of their works and before I die or whatever. And so I'm like, okay, this is the time. If I'm making this list, this is the time. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again tomorrow with another 12 Days of Christmas video.